I've driven thousands of miles in this profession. 30 years as a truck driver, crossing Brazil from end to end, hauling a bit of everything. I thought I'd seen it all on these empty roads forgotten by God. But that September night, I discovered I was terribly wrong. It was around 3 in the morning when I was traveling along BR 364, that stretch between Cuiabá and Porto Velho that looks more like a corridor to hell. There wasn't a living soul for miles, just the darkness of the forest on both sides and the constant rumble of my Scania's engine. I was tired, my eyes burning, but I had to meet the delivery deadline. That's when my headlights illuminated something in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a dead animal, maybe a tapir or a wild boar. But as I approached, the shape became too clear to ignore. It was a coffin, a polished dark wooden coffin, in the middle of the road. I stopped the truck about 20 meters away, my heart already beating faster. No vehicle had passed me in the last 2 hours. How the hell had that thing ended up there? I got out of the cab with my flashlight, feeling the humid and heavy air of the early morning. Each step toward that coffin seemed to weigh a ton. When I finally got close, I saw there were no signs of an accident, no abandoned car, nothing. The coffin was simply there, as if it had fallen from the sky. The wood was beautiful, with carved details on the sides, and there was a bronze plaque on the lid with a name, Helena Tavares 1983 to 2019. I should have gone back to the truck. I should have driven around that damn thing and continued my journey. But a morbid curiosity took hold of me. What if there was someone alive inside? What if it was some kind of contraband? My hand trembled when I touched the lid. It wasn't locked. With some effort, I managed to open it. What I saw made me stagger back. It wasn't a body. Inside the coffin, perfectly arranged, there were hundreds of photographs. All of them were of me. Me as a child, playing in my parents' backyard. Me in my first truck, at 22 years old. Me sleeping in the cab, in various different places. Me at gas stations, at roadside diners, at cheap motels. Photographs I had never seen, of moments when I didn't even know someone was nearby. My throat closed up. My hands began to sweat cold. How did someone have these photos, who had been following me all these years? I frantically went through the photographs and found something even worse at the bottom of the coffin, a photo that hadn't happened yet. It was me, older, with gray hair, inside a truck overturned in flames. The date on the back said, September 7, 2025, KM 847 of BR 364. I looked around, now completely terrified. The trees seemed to lean toward me. The silence was so deep I could hear my own blood pulsing in my temples. That's when I noticed something moving among the shadows of the forest. A tall figure, dressed in black, watching. I couldn't see the face, just the silhouette motionless like a statue. I ran to the truck like I'd never run in my life. My hands were shaking so much I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared and I accelerated, barely missing the coffin. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the figure still standing there, beside the open coffin, watching me leave. And then it did something that froze my blood. It waved at me. I drove without stopping until dawn, when I finally reached a gas station on the outskirts of Ji-Parana. I called the police, tried to explain what I had seen, but when a patrol car went back to the location with me a few hours later, there was nothing there, no coffin, no marks on the road, nothing. The police officers looked at me with pity, thinking I had fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamed it all. But I know what I saw, and every time I look at the calendar and see September approaching, my stomach tightens. Because that date is coming, that kilometer 847 exists, and I caught and stopped wondering, what happens when the future you saw in a photograph finally catches up with you? Is it possible to change destiny? Or was it sealed from the moment I opened that coffin? I continue driving the roads, but now I always look back, because sometimes, in the darkest early mornings, I swear I see that figure in black following me, always keeping its distance, always watching, waiting, and I know, deep in my soul, that our encounter ain't over yet. That job was the biggest mistake of my life. I should have been suspicious when the man offered me triple the normal rate just to transport a coffin from São Paulo to a small town lost in the interior of Goiás. He was thin, pale, and his sunken eyes seemed never to blink. He said it was urgent, that it needed to arrive before dawn, and that I should not, under any circumstances, open the cargo. But the money was too good to refuse, and I had overdue bills. I loaded the coffin into my truck bed around 10 at night. It was surprisingly light, which struck me as odd. A proper coffin with a body inside should weigh at least 80 kilos, but this one felt like it barely reached 30. I didn't ask questions. In this line of work, curiosity can cost you jobs, or worse. The first 3 hours of the journey were uneventful. I drove along empty highways, listening to old songs on the radio, trying not to think about what I was carrying behind me. But around 1 in the morning, when I was crossing a particularly desolate stretch, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A knock, 3 slow, deliberate knocks coming from inside the coffin. I almost lost control of the truck. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I told myself it was my imagination, that it was just the coffin shifting with the truck's movement. But then I heard it again. 3 knocks, stronger this time, more insistent. And then a voice, muffled but unmistakable, whispered, "Let me out." I pulled over on the shoulder, my heart hammering in my chest. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to get out of there, to abandon the truck and run. But I needed that money. I needed to know what was happening. With trembling legs, I got out of the cab and walked to the back of the truck. The coffin sat there, innocent under the moonlight. I placed my ear against the wood and heard breathing. Someone was alive in there. Against my better judgment, against all my instincts, I opened the coffin. What I saw inside made me stumble backward and fall onto the asphalt. It was a girl, no more than 8 years old, with tangled black hair and enormous dark eyes. She was pale as paper and wore a white nightgown stained with dirt. She sat up slowly, looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Fear, relief, something else entirely? "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You saved me." Before I could ask what was happening, she pointed down the road. "They're coming. You have to take me far away from here, please." I was about to ask who was coming when I saw headlights in the distance. A black van was approaching fast, too fast for that empty road. The girl grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "We have to go. Now!" Something in her voice, a raw terror, made me react. I picked her up, put her in the cab, and took off at full speed. Through the rearview mirror, I saw the van pursuing us. It was gaining ground. The girl was crying silently beside me, hugging her knees. "They kidnapped me 2 weeks ago," she finally said. "There are more of us. They were taking me to ... to a place." A bad place. My stomach churned. I understood what kind of cargo I had almost delivered. I pushed the truck to its limit, but the van was faster. It was almost upon us when I saw Salvation, a police checkpoint ahead. I honked desperately, flashed my lights, and the truck screeched into the checkpoint area. The officers ran toward us, guns drawn, just as the black van made a sharp U-turn and disappeared into the night. What followed was a blur of questions, statements, and disbelief. The girl's name was Amanda. She had been reported missing from a small town in São Paulo. The police investigation into my statement led them to an abandoned warehouse where they found 5 more children. The man who hired me was never found, but his face circulated in all the bulletins. I never got the money for that delivery, but every time I see Amanda's photo in the newspaper, alive and reunited with her family, I know I made the right choice. Sometimes, the best decision is to break the rules. That night, I discovered that the road's most macabre secret wasn't what was inside the coffin, but what that coffin represented, a network of evil that I, unknowingly, had almost fed. Now, every time I accept a job, I look the person in the eye. I ask questions. Because I learned that some cargo ain't worth any amount of money. And some secrets need to be exposed, no matter the cost. The road taught me that sometimes, opening what should stay closed is exactly what needs to happen to bring light into the darkness. Hauling freight for 15 years, and I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. Furniture, livestock, industrial equipment, you name it. But last Tuesday, when Marcus called me at midnight asking if I could transport a coffin from Austin to a remote cemetery in rural Louisiana, something in his voice made my skin crawl. He was my cousin, though, and he sounded desperate. The funeral home had backed out at the last minute, and the family was offering $2,000 cash for an overnight delivery. I said yes. God help me, I said yes. The coffin was already loaded when I arrived at the funeral home. It was an expensive one, solid mahogany with brass handles that gleamed under the parking lot lights. The funeral director, a nervous little man with sweat stains under his arms despite the cool night, handed me the paperwork without making eye contact. "Drive carefully," he muttered. "And whatever you do, don't stop until you get there." I laughed it off as typical funeral parlor dramatics, signed the papers, and hit the road. The first hour was fine. I had my thermos of coffee, some classic rock on the radio, and the interstate was empty. The coffin sat secured in the back, and I barely thought about it. But around 2 in the morning, as I crossed into Louisiana and the highway narrowed into a 2-lane road cutting through thick swampland, my radio started acting strange. The music warped into static, then cleared, then warped again. I reached to adjust it when I heard something else entirely, a voice. Faint, but unmistakable, coming from the speakers. "Help me." My hand froze on the dial. The voice came again, clearer this time, desperate and trembling. "Please, help me. I'm so cold." But it wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from behind me, from the cargo area, from inside the coffin. Every rational part of my brain screamed that it was impossible. Dead people don't talk. Dead people don't ask for help. But the voice continued, now sobbing, pleading. "I don't want to be here. I don't want to be alone." My foot eased off the gas pedal. I told myself it was the wind, or my imagination, or maybe I'd fallen asleep and this was a nightmare. But then the coffin rattled. I heard it clearly, the sound of something moving inside, fists pounding against wood. I pulled over onto the shoulder, hands shaking so badly I could barely put the truck in park. The swamp around me was pitch black, alive with the sounds of crickets and frogs and things I couldn't identify. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the cargo area through the rear window. The pounding had stopped. Silence. Then, barely audible, I heard singing, a lullaby. A woman's voice, soft and sweet, singing a melody I recognized from my childhood. My mother used to sing it to me. Something broke inside me. Whether it was courage or madness, I don't know, but I got out of the cab. The humid Louisiana air wrapped around me like a wet blanket. I approached the back of the truck slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The coffin sat there, perfectly still. I pressed my ear against the wood, and that's when I heard it, breathing. Slow, steady breathing, and underneath it, a heartbeat. My mind raced through possibilities. Catalepsy, someone accidentally pronounced dead, about to be buried alive. It happened, didn't it? Rare, but possible. I had to open it. I couldn't let someone suffocate in there. My fingers fumbled with the latches. They clicked open easily, too easily, as if they'd been waiting. I lifted the lid. The coffin was empty, completely empty. No body, no lining ripped from desperate clawing. Nothing. Just polished wood and the faint smell of roses. I stood there, my flashlight illuminating nothing, my brain unable to process what I was seeing. Then the lid slammed shut on its own, nearly taking my fingers with it. The latches clicked locked, and from inside, I heard laughter. Not terrified laughter, not the sound of someone relieved to be rescued. This was different. This was the sound of something that had been playing with me, something that enjoyed my fear. I ran back to the cab and drove. I drove faster than I ever had, breaking every speed limit. My eyes locked on the road ahead. The laughter followed me the whole way, echoing through the truck, mixing with that lullaby, with whispered promises of what was waiting for me. The coffin rocked and shook in the back, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. When I finally reached the cemetery at dawn, there were no family members waiting, no one at all, just an open grave and a caretaker who looked ancient, with eyes that had seen too much. He nodded at me as if he'd been expecting this exact scenario and pointed to the grave. I backed up the truck, and together we slid the coffin out. It was silent now, heavy as lead. We lowered it into the earth without ceremony, and the old man immediately began shoveling dirt. What was in there? I finally asked. He paused, leaning on his shovel, and looked at me with something like pity. "Nothing that should ever be let out," he said. "Some things are buried for a reason. Some things are kept in coffins not because they're dead, but because they need to stay that way." I never told Marcus what happened. I took the money and tried to forget. But every night when I close my eyes, I hear that lullaby. And I know, deep down, that whatever was in that coffin is still singing, still waiting, buried in Louisiana soil, but not gone. Never really gone, just waiting for someone else to make the mistake of listening.